All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're breaking down the facts about how HIV is transmitted. The whole idea here is to swap out fear for real, solid information, because honestly, knowledge is the most powerful tool we've got. So think back to the early 1980s for a second. This new, scary virus pops up, and it creates this wave of fear around the globe. And a huge part of that fear, it was fueled by the unknown. We didn't understand what was causing it, and crucially, how it was moving from one person to another. But wow, what a difference a few decades of science and research can make. We've really moved from a time of fear and a lot of harmful myths to where we are now, an era of knowledge and empowerment. When you understand the facts, it gives you the power to protect yourself and, just as importantly, to treat people living with HIV with compassion, not as if they're outsiders.
Okay, so if we're going to get prevention right, we have to start with the fundamentals of transmission. How exactly does the virus get from one person to another? It turns out it's not nearly as easy to transmit as a lot of people used to think.
It really just boils down to two things, two critical conditions that both have to happen. First, the virus has to get into a person's bloodstream. It needs a direct route in. Second, once it's there, it needs to be able to actually take hold and start making copies of itself. Both have to happen. And that's why we find HIV in certain body fluids, like blood, semen, vaginal fluids, and breast milk, because those are the places where these conditions can be met. So let's start with the big one. The most common way HIV is transmitted around the world, sexual contact. Now, it's a pretty complex process biologically, but we can break it down so it's easy to follow. So you might be wondering, how does the virus actually get past the body's natural defenses? Well, let me introduce you to the Langerhans cells. You can think of them as the immune system's own little taxi service. When HIV is present in the mucous membranes, like in the genital tract, these taxi cells can literally pick up the virus and give it a direct ride to the CD4+ T cells, which are HIV's main target. This is how infection can happen even when there are no cuts or sores you can see. And this brings up a really important question. Why is it that women are biologically more at risk for getting HIV than men during unprotected sex? It's important to know the reasons are all about anatomy and biology, not about behavior.
Well, there are actually several factors at play here. For one, a woman's body has a much larger surface area of mucous membranes that get exposed during sex. On top of that, semen, which can carry a lot of the virus, stays in the body for hours, which just increases the exposure time. And for younger women, their genital tracts aren't fully mature yet, which can make them even more vulnerable.
And then there's this, and this is huge. Having another STI, especially one that causes any kind of inflammation or sores, basically opens the door for HIV. It actually increases the risk of transmission by about 4 times on average. It just goes to show how critical overall sexual health is for HIV prevention. Okay, next up, let's talk about the second major pathway, which is direct transmission through blood. This is actually the single most efficient way for the virus to travel. Just look at that number, 98 to 100%. That means the chance of getting HIV from a blood transfusion with contaminated blood is, well, it's pretty much a certainty. Back in the early days of the epidemic, this was a devastating reality for so many people. But, and this is a really big but, here is the good news. That specific risk has been practically wiped out. Today, our blood supply is protected by incredibly strict and effective safety measures that make it super safe. Modern blood services have multiple layers of protection. They start by using voluntary, unpaid donors from low-risk groups. Then, every donor has to fill out a detailed questionnaire. And most importantly, every single unit of donated blood is screened with something called nucleic acid testing, or NAT. It's a super sensitive test that can detect the virus itself, which closes that window period where an infection could be missed. Now, while blood transfusions are safe, we've got to be crystal clear about this. Sharing needles to inject drugs is still an extremely high-risk activity. What happens is, when someone injects, a tiny bit of their blood gets drawn back into the syringe. If that needle is then shared, that blood gets injected directly into the next person's bloodstream. It's a perfect setup for transmission. And that brings us to our third main route of transmission, from an HIV-positive mother to her baby during pregnancy, childbirth, or through breastfeeding. And this is an area where, thankfully, we've seen some absolutely incredible progress.
I mean, this is just an amazing medical success story. Without any treatment, the risk of a mother passing HIV to her child is somewhere between 25 and 45%. That's a huge risk. But with modern medicine, that risk plummets to just 1 or 2%. It's incredible.
So what's the secret? How did we do it?
Well, It's something called antiretroviral therapy, or ART. By taking these medicines, an expectant mom can lower the amount of virus in her body, what we call her viral load, down to undetectable levels. This basically shields the baby during pregnancy and delivery, and it has turned what was almost a certainty into something that is now almost entirely preventable.
Okay, we've covered how HIV is spread. Now it's time to be just as clear about how it's not. This is where we get to bust all those myths that have caused so much stigma and unnecessary fear over the years.
Let's just run through this, plain and simple. You cannot get HIV from mosquitoes. The virus doesn't survive in them. Not from toilet seats, not from swimming pools. You can't get it from sharing food or drinks, from hugging, shaking hands, or a social kiss on the cheek, not from someone coughing or sneezing. And, like we just covered, you definitely can't get it from donating blood. HIV is actually a pretty fragile virus that just doesn't last long outside the body.
And all of this brings us to what might be the single most important takeaway. The virus doesn't care who you are, it doesn't discriminate. It's not about being a high-risk person, it's about high-risk behaviors. Labeling whole groups of people is just wrong, and it's stigmatizing. The focus has to be on the specific actions that carry risk.
So we end with this question. We have the knowledge now. We know the facts about how HIV is spread and, more importantly, how it isn't. The real challenge for all of us is to take that knowledge and use it, not just to protect our own health, but to build a world that finally replaces stigma with support and fear with real understanding.